welcome to the desk response. Today we are responding to Science is Dope, Pranav Radhakrishnan. In fact, just a couple of days back, we did a two-part response to his video called The Story of God. And while the second part was yet to come out, he dropped another video called Church versus Science. I think that is the current title of the video, and you'll understand why I'm calling it the current title, because the thumbnail and the title of the video changed multiple times since the video came out. And I'm also joined with my brother Ashish. Hi, Ashish. I think this is the first time we are coming on the Carpenter's desk together.
Yes, indeed. It's the first time we are doing a video together, I believe.
I don't know since when we've been planning to do videos together several times. Even our well-wishers have asked to, do reaction videos together. But for whatever reason, we share the same home, although currently we are in two different cities. Even while we were together back in Bombay, we never did a video together.
Yes, and now it's finally happening. So it's good.
Yes, Ashish. So before we even get to the response,
I think it will also clear out doubts about we being the same person. I think many of the people around have a notion that these two. I don't know. We don't look similar, but then
sound similar, I guess.
Maybe, but I've got wish for your birthday, and that's happened with you as well.
And secondly, there's also people who think that I am the elder one. Do you want to clarify that?
No, let it be.
So before we get to the video, Ashish, I think you were the one who told me about Science is Dope. You watched his video maybe more than a year back on temple mechanics, and that's how you got introduced to Science is Dope. And it was only very recently that I started watching some of his content.
Right. So I don't know if it's a year ago or more than a year ago. I believe he did a video against a channel called as String or Sting. I'm not recollecting it properly. Who had done a video about temple mechanics? I mean, it sounds very scientific and technical, but it's all about how this guy is in a way he's promoting pseudoscience, whatever. So Pranav, he did a video in response to String, and it was really a good video. I mean, he has done multiple videos. One of his current area that he focuses is against beer and bicycle. I don't know whether you're aware of that channel, because you don't have the problem of weight, right? So this guy is who gives advice on diet and how to reduce weight and stuff. So I had watched his videos earlier on, and I'm aware of his work. But then again, he promotes pseudoscience about ghosts and about all these other blind beliefs. And Pranav did a couple of interesting responses against him, and that's what he's doing now. And that's how I got introduced to him. But not all his ideas are scientific or rational as it seems, and we'll be responding to one of them today.
Yes, so it's all right, when he's calling out the pseudoscience in religions per se, and I think we agree with a lot of the content that is coming out from Science is Dope. But as I said also in the last response, often he steps beyond the epistemological boundaries of science and kind of equivocates science with atheism. So Ashish, just a few days back on his other channel, Pranav Radhakrishnan, as that channel bears his own name, he came on a live and invited people who dispute his content. And you had maybe a 10-minute conversation with him?
Right. So it was a 10-minute conversation, and that was mentioned in his social media post earlier on. We interacted for 10 minutes, and it's available on his channel, not the Sciences Group, but the second channel, Pranav Radhakrishnan. And I pointed out some of the errors that he was propagating, and he kind of tried to respond to it. And also he said that he would look into these things and get back to us later. And we also contacted him on his Instagram a couple of weeks ago to see if a conversation works out. But I think he has not seen the message. Hopefully, he might respond to it.
Absolutely. So several people who watched that live conversation did reach out on Instagram as well, that they would like to see a conversation between you, Ashish, and Pranav. What you started in those 10 minutes continue. So even if you guys are watching, definitely we have reached out to him, and we are definitely looking forward to his response. And if that can be actualized, if that conversation, we'll be grateful. So let's get straight to it, Ashish. And that 10-minute conversation also was on this very video that came out, Church versus Science, which is the primary content that we will be responding to. So while he says that he's tackling pseudoscience and all of that, even in history, there is a discipline that historians or scholars like William Vand would call scientific history. So history also functions using the scientific method. What is the best data available? And then you make, you participate in what is called an inductive reasoning to ascertain the historicity of an event or so. So when you apply that very concept of scientific method to history, you can identify what we can call pseudo-history. And perhaps this particular content that came out, Church versus Science, it qualifies to be pseudo-history. What do you think?
Absolutely. So one of the things that the modern atheists, and that includes Pranav as well, they don't understand is that science is something else and the history of science is something else. So so when I am listening about, if I'm listening a podcast on cosmology, or a lecture on cosmology, or some scientific facts, I would prefer to listen to a physicist, maybe Sean Carroll or somebody else. But if I'm listening to the history of science, that is how science came about, then I'm not going to listen to Neil deGrasse Tyson, because he's not an expert in the field of history of science. He doesn't know much about it, and he himself has made a lot of errors. In fact, in one of in some of the ideas that Pranav promotes in his channel, as well as we'll see in this video as well, comes from not comes originally from, but is similar to what is propagated by Neil in his show, The Cosmos, about Bruno and stuff. So I'm not going to listen to these people when I'm looking about history of science. So the atheists, especially the new atheists, should understand that there is a difference between science and the discipline of history of science. So, and Pranav clearly fails to make this distinction. That's what I feel.
Also, the philosophy of science, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We did not get into that, and I don't think we will be talking a little bit about the philosophy of science in this segment as well.
So let's get started. I think you have ordered some of the clips, just to break down that content, and we can look to respond to them one by one. So before we do that, definitely go and check out the conversation that Ashish had with Pranav. We'll leave a link to that video as well. You see, we are not basically arguing for a scientific concordism. That's not the argument. What we are basically putting forward is something that has.
Wait a minute, Ashish. We need to clarify what is scientific concordism for our viewers. Maybe you can go ahead and do that.
Sure. So it's not an argument that Bible is a scientific book and there are scientific details in the Bible. That's not what the claim is. The claim is very modest, that Christian theology played a very crucial role in the development of science. And by the way, as I said, this has the consensus of modern historians of science. They're virtually in agreement that this is how modern science came out to be. So let's get straight into it, Ashish. If you can play the first clip, and then we can start our response.
Yeah, definitely.
You would assume, for example, that this man, Giordano Bruno, burning at the stake, did something unthinkable. Do you know what his crime was? He claimed that the stars were like the sun, and all of them had planets going around them. What was so wrong about this? Well, there was one group of people that did not like what he said: the Catholic Church.
That is one of the favorites of these internet skeptics, Bruno. Ashish, I'll allow you to debunk the historical errors in what he's saying there. But before that, he changed the thumbnail and the video title multiple times. I think he started by Catholic Church versus Science, something like that. That was the first title, and then that changed to Christianity versus Science with a painting of Jesus. And then I think I may be wrong here if it's even changed that, but I think the last thumbnail that I saw was one Pope with laser or something flashing out of his eyes, the evil Hollywood clergy thing. So I think that's nudging your it's a psychological nudge. The church is evil, they do all the blah blah, the bad things, and then you're pushing your ideology there. So I think he played a lot with the titles, and so that also shows that maybe he himself is not sure how to communicate this. Is it Christianity that is against science? Is it the institution of the church that is against science? And I think he got a lot of pushback in the comment section as well.
Yeah, and that reflects on his latest video title. It's something like I'm not sure. Yeah, church versus science or war on free speech. So now it's no longer on science, but then it's on this free speech. That talks a lot because here what he's trying to do is he's actually trying to build up a narrative that does not have a good historical backing, and when you do that, you end up, getting in situations like this.
Exactly. So I think this 3-minute video that came out recently on his channel is called Christianity versus Science. Maybe we'll address that later. He apparently claims that there are no prominent Christians who are scientists today. And even if they are fundamentalist Christians. So folks like Francis Collins and Henry Schaeffer, they're fundamentalist Christians. We'll come to that later. So Ashish, just go ahead, and the burning Bruno, what happened?
So here you have to notice two things that he tells you. One is that he says that Bruno was supporting the heliocentric model, and that's the reason why he was targeted by the Roman Catholic Church. And also, he's a second point that he makes is that the Roman Catholic Church, was against the heliocentric model. Now, just to make it clear, a lot of atheists and people who support such kind of views would come down and comment and say that, this and that. But see, listen, what we are not talking about, we are not trying to justify the evil that was done by the Roman Catholic Church. No Catholic in his in his proper mind would ever try to justify the historical evils that were done by the church. And there were evil that was done by the church. And in fact, so for example, one example that I'd like to give is, just because the atom bomb or the nuclear bomb killed so many people in the First World War, and because of that, you don't say that nuclear physics is wrong, right? So you can't make an argument like that, and there's no need for us to justify. But what's right is right, what's wrong is wrong. So what historically happened did happen, and what historically did not happen did not happen. First of all, Bruno was indeed burned at stake, and that is wrong. And nobody's trying to justify what happened to Bruno. But what we are trying to say is that Bruno was not burned for his scientific achievements. He was not a scientist, first of all. Secondly, he was not burned for his scientific achievements. A couple of the views that was held by Bruno, he was behind these texts known as Corpus Hermeticum, and it was the writings of a Egyptian sage called as Hermes. He was, he was leaning towards the magic from Egypt and such kind of things. So he had a lot of heretical views about the virgin birth, about the divinity of Christ, and these were like really problematic views. And the Inquisition acted on those what do you call it? Those accusations that were leveled against him because of his heretical views. He was not killed for his heliocentric views. In fact, Pranav also mentions this in passing, because he says that the Roman Catholic Church was hunting for Bruno later in the video, and then Bruno started running away from the authorities, and that's where he came across the heliocentric view. So Pranav himself, recognizes the fact that Bruno was first, being charged for or being accused for something else, and during his, travel, he comes across the geocentric view. So Bruno was not killed for his geocentric view. In fact, this is what I wanted to show when I interacted with Pranav. I actually um, quote this from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the Nicholas Copernicus page. When you come to the end of the article, you see that when Giordano Bruno was burned at stake as an heretic, it had nothing to do with his writings in support of Copernican cosmology, and this is clearly shown in Finocchio's reconstruction of accusation against Bruno. So this is one of the most legit and academically sound places that you find information. It's not Wikipedia or Quora.com. It is the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. It's very clear. The historians everywhere who understand the medieval times and who has done substantial work, if you do even a primary reading of history, it's very clear that Bruno was not killed for his heliocentric view. That's not how it is. A very wrong reading of history. It's a pseudo-history that's being propagated here. I think I made myself clear.
Exactly. So, by the way, Ashish said this, but let me repeat this again, that we are not justifying what the church did. Burning heretics was not something that was right. It was evil. And that is not something that the New Testament would endorse or Christ would endorse. So the church as an institution did a lot of evil. Christians have done evil. Christians, even today they would do evil, but that has no bearing on Christianity itself. And also, if you are interested, do check out the conversation that we had with the classicist and historian of science, John Dixon, a couple of months back. That link is in the comments, where we discuss about the bullies and saints of Christian history. So in that conversation, particularly in his book, he also talks about this myth of dark ages. And Pranav, this, if you heard in the video, he did mention about the dark period. That is false. It's called the revisionist history, which means revisionism is basically a historical school of history, a school of historical thought that is no longer prevalent among historians, which basically says that, oh, you know what, it's a kind of chronological snobbery that the people before us, they were in dark ages, they were, very backward, and somewhat we are the enlightened, modern, elite thinkers. So that kind of those kind of ideas were propagated, ironically, by Protestants early on against the Catholics, but then over time, historians have figured out that, well, the seed for modern science, the seed for modern universities, education, everything can be found in that period, which is sometimes what these skeptics would call the Dark Ages. And Ashish, I think we should also
adding to that. Just adding to that, some historians call them as light ages. In fact, those were the time when all of these universities, the Oxford, the Cambridge, and all the great universities in Italy and other parts, England and Europe, those universities were established during these so-called dark ages. So, that doesn't look like dark ages, wherein learning was so much appreciated. So yeah, we'll move on to
yes, we would move on. But if you are listening to this and you are a skeptic, right, and a skeptic can also be objective, in his analysis, would strongly recommend Tim O'Neill, History for Atheists, right? His channel. He's a skeptic, but he's setting the record straight and saying that, oh, Jesus mythicism and the myth of dark ages, these are myths that skeptics like to propagate about history, but that's not the claim. Just give the credit where it's due, what Christianity has done, and you can still defend your skepticism. All right, Ashish, let's move on. What's the next?
All right. So next is, he's misquoting some verses out of context. Misquoting out of context, of course. So I'll just play that.
Including one really popular book, the Bible. For example, consider these verses. According to them, Earth being still was God's design, and the sun moving around the Earth a testimony to God's power. In fact, one of the main ideas in the Bible is that Earth is a special place, and so is everything that lives on it, including humans. So no wonder that this special place happens to be the center of the universe. We've already seen how passages in the Bible have a geocentric point of view.
All right, so here you actually see Pranav. He's trying to impose some of his ideas. He's actually reading into the text. The Psalms or the verses that he quotes from Psalm 93, Psalm 104, Ecclesiastes, and Joshua, they are not written to portray a geocentric model, because the geocentric model is actually a very Greek thought. It comes, from around somewhere 300 BC or something. And the Hebrew writers, they are actually writing with a different cosmology in mind, a sort of a ancient Near Eastern cosmology that they had in mind. They did not have a geocentric idea in their mind when they were writing these passages. And none of these passages should be taken literally, in the sense, because the Psalms that he quotes is clearly poetic, and any person who does the rudimentary reading of the Bible would understand that there are poetic devices that needs to be understood. And even Joshua, for that matter, is written from an ancient Near Eastern context. So you have to really look into those contexts to understand what Joshua's idea about the universe was. It was definitely not a geocentric idea, and I'll not get into those because that would require another series of explanation. But it's clear that the ancient Near Eastern writers or the Hebrew writers who were writing later, they did not understand the universe to be in a geocentric fashion as the Greeks understood it. And this is a total mishap that has happened from Pranav. It's an error. It's a very grave error, and it's a total misunderstanding of the context and the history that follows. So, nothing much to comment here. And then he carries these idea later on to Copernicus's, incident. So let's have a look at any thoughts, Asher, over there.
No, I think I have a few thoughts to add on the Bible verses, but maybe after he plays that. But yeah, on the Joshua's episode, I had a conversation with a YouTube skeptic from the Carpenter's Desk ID itself on his video on Joshua stopping the sun, and I tried to convey to him that what is happening there should be understood within the cultural context of the ancient Near East. And we had actually published the interaction on Instagram as well as screenshots. I think I can leave the link in the comments. So there is a lot happening there. I mean, if you want to understand a text, you'll have to understand it from the genre in which it is written, as well as the cultural parameters within which it is operating. I have some points there to add, Ashish, but maybe after you play the Copernicus clip.
Right.
Copernicus did not share the model publicly and discussed it only with his close friends. And no, this is not because he was an introvert. To answer why, we have to turn our attention to the Catholic Church of the 15th century. You see, in Europe during this time, Catholicism was the predominant religion, and the Catholic Church had a lot of power. For instance, they were considered distributors of passports to heaven, something that would ensure that you could get into heaven after you die. And these passports, called indulgences, were sold to whoever paid the most money. And as you can guess, there was a long line of people willing to buy them. The sale of these indulgences and other things that the church did resulted in it amassing a fortune. And if there's one thing we can learn from history, it's that with great wealth comes great power and influence. Soon the Catholic Church became one of the most powerful forces in Europe. And whatever the church said, people believed in, and it became the doctrine of the day. Only a handful of people questioned these doctrines. After all, getting in the bad books of the church was not a good idea, because they used this power they had in ugly ways. An example of this was the Inquisition, an institution that punished people for speaking up against the dogmas of the church. People who did so were labeled heretics, and heresy was not tolerated. The Inquisition spread all across Europe to Spain, France, Portugal, and Italy. Books were banned, people were imprisoned, and opposing ideas were clamped down with extreme brutality. All this to make sure that people were scared to even think about alternative ideas. And this is why Copernicus was scared to express his ideas publicly. He did so only a year before he died in a book called On the Revolution of Heavenly Spheres. Smart. And once it was published, his ideas of heliocentrism gained a handful of followers who appreciated the model's simplicity and the power of its predictions. And how did the church react to this? Well, they engaged in a rational discussion with the supporters of heliocentrism. To put forward their arguments, they used evidence and logic and did not resort to violent methods.
If there is anything that is going to come crashing down like a house of cards on a windy day, it is actually Pranav's history. Uh, and the blunders that he makes. First of all, he's trying to read in these biblical verses with the geocentric idea that was supported in the Middle Ages. But again, you must understand that these geocentric ideas are coming from an Aristotelian view, which was the view at that time. And if you want to term it as science, because you can't actually term it as science because during those times, theology, mathematics, and astronomy, and all these things were clubbed together. And people who did theology, there were also people who did science and things like that. So every question had some theological implication and all those things, some philosophical implication and stuff like that. We'll not get into that, but see, that was the current paradigm. Okay, and Copernicus was working against that paradigm. So a theory is not sufficing. As Pranav mentions about the retrograde motion and the problem that Copernicus solved, but you see, in any scientific thinking, a theory does not get abandoned just because a new theory comes, right? It has to be established beyond that. And there are problems like the parallax issue that the theory was facing, multiple historical problems that the heliocentric model faced earlier on. And in fact, Copernicus is talking about a perfect circular orbits that the planets are following. And later Kepler comes in and corrects it and says that it's elliptical orbits. And then Galileo comes in. And so it's a process that is happening. But somehow, Pranav thinks that, Pranav says that Copernicus did not want to publish his ideas because the Catholic Church, was about to kill him. And somehow he published it just a year before his death because, I don't know, maybe Copernicus was aware that he's going to die a year later. And that's why he published it. At that time, it's wrong because I will actually quote for Pranav's knowledge some historical documents. In fact, roughly a decade, that is in 1533, a decade before his death, Albert Wittgenstein, who was Copernicus' uncle and a secretary to the Pope, he gave a lecture about the Copernican paradigm shift. And this was attended by the Pope himself. So even though Copernicus' official work was not published, his ideas were, getting popularized because there were other writings as well. And the Pope was highly impressed by these ideas. Okay, and on November 1536, roughly 7 years prior to his death, this is a Cardinal Nicholas von Schonberg, who was the Archbishop of Capua. He writes a letter to Copernicus urging him to publish his findings. So maybe as we are talking, we'll leave the complete letter on our video so that if you are interested, you can read it. You can check out on it. And now let me quote for you from the Stanford Encyclopedia again from the page of Copernicus. It says that in the 1600s, there was no official Catholic position in the on the Copernican system, and it was certainly not heresy. This is again quoting from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, very coming from a very authentic source and not like Wikipedia or Quora.com. So what Pranav is propagating here is completely pseudo history. It does not have any historical backing, and this is true with many of the new atheists. Like all of a sudden, as soon as they become atheists, they are transformed into people who are completely aware of history, historical method, and who are experts on Big Bang and cosmology. And all of a sudden, I don't know where they get that talent. I mean, so what are your thoughts, Asher?
So yes, I think Copernicus, Bruno, and obviously the third favorite is Galileo, and we're coming there. But this myth, for some reason, refuses to die on the internet, despite the fact that it has been universally rejected by historians of science. And I think that in the two clips that we played, the first clip especially highlights a couple of verses on the screen, and then goes on to interpret the verses as well. So I'll just read Peter Harrison, the noted historian of science, in the book The Fall of Man and the Foundations of Science, where he basically argues how Christian theology gave rise to science. So this is what he writes. Before that, what Pranav is trying to say here is that if you would take the Bible for what it is, right, if you would read it as it is, then that would have stifled science. But this is what he says. Strange as it may seem, the Bible played a positive role in the development of science. Now pay attention. Had it not been for the rise of the literal interpretations of the Bible and the subsequent appropriation of biblical narratives by early scientists, modern science may not have risen at all. In sum, the Bible and its literal interpretation have played a vital role in the development of Western science. I'm not quoting a Quora expert here, I'm quoting a real historian of science. So people like Pranav and internet skeptics in general would do well to actually read such works, and it's no harm, updating yourself and even correcting yourself is only for good. So I think we can go to the third among the trio that they quote, Galileo.
Pope ordered Galileo to renounce his ideas, and Galileo agreed. He wanted to maintain a low profile and not create any trouble for himself. And he did this for the next 15 years, but things changed in 1632 when he did his next book drop. You see, Galileo hadn't just abandoned his beliefs in heliocentrism. He firmly believed that his telescopic observations provided enough evidence for the heliocentric theory. So he began writing a book called Dialogue Concerning the Two Chief World Systems. As the title suggests, the book was a dialogue between heliocentrists and geocentrists in the form of a debate. The geocentrists would often express skepticism for heliocentrism, and the heliocentrists would use observational evidence to convince him. For example, things like mountains on the moon, faces of Venus, moons of Jupiter, etc. that we've already discussed. But how was this possible? Did the church not oppose it? Well, Galileo took permission from the Pope and the Inquisition before publishing it. They agreed on one condition: Galileo could not advocate for heliocentrism. All he could do was remain neutral and present arguments for both sides. Galileo agreed, but when the book came out, everything changed. You see, in Galileo's book, the geocentrist would often end up making a mockery of himself because the evidence was always against him. The heliocentrist would win every argument because he had observations to back up his claims. And the church saw this as Galileo advocating for heliocentrism. And as you can guess, the church was not happy. Galileo was brought to Rome for his Inquisition trial. And this time the punishment was stricter. He was asked to condemn his opinions. His books, current and any he may write in the future, were all banned, especially the one that started it all. He was not allowed to speak publicly in favor of heliocentrism ever again. That was unless he was willing to face the consequences. He was placed under house arrest and would remain there for the rest of his life.
Alright, we have come to the third favorite, Galileo. And this is again a myth that Galileo was somehow tortured. One interesting point that I should make here is Copernicus and Galileo. Nobody talks about Kepler. Kepler also was propagating heliocentric model, but Kepler was never punished. I mean, I don't know why. But Kepler's idea was well received, and he was a part of the clergy, if I'm not wrong. He had a lot of Christian ideas. That's true with Copernicus as well. If you really talk about the perfect circles, Copernicus's idea is that.
Ashish, I've heard. So basically, in Kepler's case, I think he begins his book or his writings by praising God and ending. So I remember having this conversation on Clubhouse, and the response that I heard was that they had to do it because otherwise Kepler too would have been tortured. So he would praise God in the starting part of his book. So maybe it's out of fear. Who knows?
I'm not qualified to respond to those objections. Right? I'll have to study more, maybe. But see, the revisionist idea that the church and science were at war came much later on, roughly in the 19th century, when John William Draper and Andrew Dixon White they published a book in 1874 and 1896, a history of conflict between science and religion, a history of warfare of science with theology in Christendom. That was in 1896. And if you are interested, you definitely have to get this book that I'm actually going to quote from now, Return of the God Hypothesis by Stephen C. Meyer, and Asher has done an interview with Dr. Meyer, which hopefully should come out. And if you're watching this video, maybe after the interview comes out, we'll leave a link to that in the description box. If that's not the case, wait for it. It will come out very soon. So here, this myth was propagated by these guys' work. I mean, Draper and White, and this is refuted by the modern historians of science in the 20th century. And Meyer himself quotes certain really prominent writers, really prominent philosophers and historians of science. You can check them out if you have an internet, uh, and if you have Google, you can just Google them out. So some of the names are Herbert Butterfield, A.C. Crombie, Robert Merton, and Holmes Rollston III, Stephen Fuller, Peter Harrison that you quoted just now, and Rodney Stark. Some of them are not Christians. Rodney Stark is not Christian; he's an agnostic, right? So these are historians of science who are qualified to talk about this field, because, as I told, there is a difference between scientists and historians of science. Historians of science are the people who are talking about how science evolved over time, right? And when we come to Galileo, an interesting, point that needs to be noted is, see, Galileo. What was the chief discovery of Galileo? Galileo was his idea was about his chief discovery was the moons of Jupiter, and he became very popular because of that discovery. And Galileo wanted to be famous, and there's a lot of history that needs to be addressed here. You can again check out the channel by what is it, Tom O'Neill, right?
Tom O'Neill,
Um,
uh,
History for Atheists.
History for Atheists. Yeah.
It's history for Atheists. You can also check out another historian of science whom I was referring to while I was making this video, while I was preparing for this conversation. James C. Uh, Ungu Renault, if I'm not pronouncing its name, I think it's a Romanian name. Ungu Renault. He's a historian of science. We'll leave a link to his blog in the description. You see, Galileo and the Pope Urban, if I'm not wrong, they were great friends. And this was before he became the Pope. After Galileo becomes the Pope, Galileo, and Pranav misquotes a lot of history. He says that Galileo was, he kept silent for 15 years. Again, that's actually wrong. He wrote a play, a satirical play, in which he had a character called a Simplicio, or in English, Simpleton. And people who read it found uncanny resemblance of that character with the Pope. He was actually making a caricature of him, and you know that was not. I mean, if you're going to write about the Pope, who is a politically very strong, powerful figure, and you are assuming that you will get away with it. I mean, if I were to sit here and write about any of the leaders of our country, I mean, I'm not going to be. I mean, you understand what I'm saying, right? And then you expect people to protect you. That's what happened with Galileo. And in fact, he was never arrested in a very strict sense. We have historical records which shows that he was house arrested, and definitely it's what you get when you know when you mock the Pope. Uh, uh, but again, as I said, the atheist reading of history is very wrong. This section from James C. Ungurino's article, where he talks about the complex history that surrounded Galileo's affairs. It was a time of Reformation. There was too much things going on, and he says that uh, if Copernicus's book had been published either a century earlier or a century later, the Galileo affair would never have probably happened. So this had to do with the political scenario of those times. Uh, I'm talking about Galileo's pushback. Okay, the pushback that is really not. He was not arrested in a strict sense. He was not persecuted definitely by the church. He was persecuted because of his writings against the Pope, and in fact, he had picked up a debate with a Jesuit priest. And what happened was during the course of the debate, they started abusing each other, and Galileo was very liberal in abusing, and he had this habit of utterly dismantling the opponent. And of course, he was very logical person, and he could do that because he was brilliant. He could do that, but at the same time, these ad hominem attacks, they did not go with the community of Jesuits, and Jesuits, were very powerful when it comes to a lot of scientific achievements were contributed. A lot of scientific contribution were made by the Jesuits, and getting in a fight with the Jesuits did not really help Galileo. So the atheist interpreting Galileo's affair is absolutely out of history. Now, as we come to a closure, Pranav talks about free speech. I don't know why is he doing that with these three characters. If you're talking about free speech, you should actually talk about William Tyndale and other Reformation fathers, Martin Luther and Calvin and Zwingli. It was their work uh, that, in fact, gave an impetus to the scientific revolution as well, in some sense. So I don't understand where he's getting these ideas from, where he's getting these
So
history lessons from. Yeah.
at least he doesn't go thus far to say that Galileo Galileo was killed, because I see that floating around on the internet as well. In fact, if you're really keen on delving further into the historical context of Bruno, Galileo, Copernicus, and so on, that Ashish just described, I would highly recommend this book that was published by the Harvard University Press, called Galileo Goes to Jail. So that's in the title itself, Galileo Goes to Jail and Other Myths About Science and Religion. It's edited by Ronald Numbers, who is an agnostic, a historian of science, and has contributions from several philosophers and historians of science. And I think it basically, I think in the article, in the chapter by Noah J. Ephron, I'm just recalling from my memory, it says right up there that virtually all historians of science today agree that Christian theology and institutions, both Protestant and Catholic, gave rise to what in time came to be called as modern science.
I think this is the part where people get confused with. They think that we are saying that scientists were Christians. No, that's not what we are saying.
Yeah,
In
Ashish,
fact, that happened.
when you spoke to Pranav as well, I think he tried to derail it to basically claim that, oh, are you kind of saying that the Newton
Yeah,
and Pascal and all of them were Christians, and
right. And
therefore,
that is very evident from a reply that he gives to, Justin Brierley's video. Not a reply, he was reacting to the video. He talked about George Ellis. Talks about, he says that there are no modern scientists after the Darwinian, theory. That is, my goodness, that I don't know. I mean, that's one of the greatest blunders that I've heard him say. George Ellis, and I actually did a comparison of George Ellis's H index. He's one of the most prominent cosmologists out there, and I compared it to Neil deGrasse Tyson's H index. So people who are not aware of H index, please check it out.
of course, Ashish,
It's a criteria.
I feel that is an attempt to, he made that video why most scientists are atheists. And then he updated that to say in the last video that we responded to that, oh, I should have said that why most scientists post Darwin are atheists. And in the last response, I quoted the 100 years of Nobel Prizes, which is from the 20th century, that basically shows where the religious beliefs of the Nobel Prize winners are located. So ideally, these claims are baseless. And are you going to be so, I mean, I'm very sorry, but that sounds very arrogant to say what he did. Basically that, those prominent scientists who are Christians or religious today are basically just fundamentalists, or they're not very prominent. So what do you mean? Francis Collins, Henry Schaeffer, James Tour, George Ellis, Christopher Isham.
Even for that matter, the Freeman Dyson is the poster boy of science. I mean, he's not a very traditional Christian, but he has, of a cultural Christian kind of thing. He has got his views there, but we'll not get into that. But see, he's not an atheist, definitely for sure. His views are a little bit complex, but see, what we are And that's not what we're trying to say. We're not trying to say that Christians, scientists were Christians. What we are trying to say, and we'll explore that in some later video, uh, is that the what you call the modern science, Christianity played a very key role in giving birth to modern science, the ideas, the tenets of science. And it would not have happened in any other culture because of certain reasons. And it originated in Europe in the Middle Ages for because of certain factors. And that would, maybe we will explore in some other video, right? That's what we are trying to say, and we'll explore that as I suggested in some other video. But let me just quote for you from Ronald Numbers, the work that was edited by Ronald Numbers, I had mentioned a few minutes ago. It says, no scientist to our knowledge ever lost his life because of his scientific views. Okay, he's talking about the church and Europe. He says that we have no knowledge about anybody who was a scientist and was killed uh, by the church. It did not happen. And Bruno's case, as we saw, was not because of his scientific views, because of his heretical views. And that's not just Bruno. There are a lot of Reformation fathers and thinkers who were killed, which is wrong. Nobody is justifying it. Okay, so that should not have been done. Wrong is wrong. Evil is evil, even if the church doesn't. So maybe next time Pranav makes a video, I would suggest him to have a very um, sober opinion and something that is based on history and not pseudo history, and stop propagating narratives that have no historical backing.
Stop
You could be
propagating atheism in the name of science. Science has nothing to do with atheism. There is nothing in science that points to atheism. So if you are an atheist, maybe give good arguments or evidence supporting atheism itself. And I think, Ashish, that's a good place to wind up this conversation. And I know we would have loved to go on talking, but there's more to be added. In fact, a lot of things are just coming to my mind, right? I'm reminded of the conversation that the Oxford mathematician John Lennox had with the philosopher of science, atheist, Michael Roos, where Michael Roos says multiple times, being an atheist philosopher, he says, modern science owes its very being to Christianity. This is not us saying it, right? These are experts in the field. So all in all, again, the invitation to Pranav is open, and we really respect the content that he's putting out. We agree with a lot of it. But on these areas, we have differences, and we would definitely like if he would respond to our Instagram message, and we could sit and over a cup of coffee have this conversation together. So that's it. This is Asher, John, and with my brother Ashish for the Carpenters.